Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program where we talk to reporters and writers and journalists and editors and give you a little background as to what they're thinking about when they're writing and maybe some further explanation of some of the work that they've done. In our second segment today, boy, are you going to be happy because we're going to go into the in a way the archive, but into the history of jazz in the Bronx. And that's going to be real exciting. But right now, let's say hello once again to the senior housing reporter at City Limits. It is Emma Whitford. Nice to see you once again, Emma.
Nice to see you as well.
Let's just get right into it. And I told you beforehand, what is going on with migrants in New York City? We have 100,000 migrants. We have a shelter system for homeless people that's overburdened. And this story you wrote really raised my eyebrows. The state said, and here's the headline, it grants reduced shelter standards for adult migrants when necessary. And so that means that clean mattresses, sheets and pillows, towels, soap, toilet paper, among the requirements that they've agreed to waive. Tell us about this, and then we'll try to make some sense of it.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I will say when I was reporting this one out, it was a bit eye-popping to me as well. But yeah, as you had mentioned, since last spring, so spring of 2022, we've had more than 100,000 immigrants come to New York City. This is a large volume of people to be coming from New York from other countries. When you look at the record historically, lots of different reasons for this that we certainly don't have a full episode to dedicate to right now. But this goes back to early last year. Not only folks coming from the US-Mexico border, but also likely from other US cities coming to New York, maybe to meet up with friends or family and really try to build a life in this country. So the story that I drilled down on, there has been a lot of back and forth in recent weeks and months between three entities. We have the New York City government, the state government, and the federal government. And advocates agree that every governmental entity has an important role to play in making sure that everyone in New York City has a roof over their head.
Of course.
When New York has a very unique set of court precedents that establish a right to shelter, which started out as just saying every person in New York City who needs a bed is going to have access to one, at least temporarily. But since then, there have been a lot of regulations that have built up, some of which are enforced by the state about not just having access to a shelter, but having access to a safe and clean and relatively hospitable shelter. So this story I wrote
with toilet paper.
Well, yes, exactly. So the Eric Adams administration, the mayor of New York, sent a letter to the state with a list of requests about various ways it can deal with this like large influx of people all at once. So basically our standard existing shelter system is not big enough. So that's why we've seen some other city agencies step in. You've seen some larger tent facilities with cots.
So let me just ask you about this, the phrase that's in there, that's in your writing, that apparently is in the structure of it, where no alternative is available. That is so vague. So you say, okay, I forgot where the latest place is that they're talking about, putting a tent with
Floyd Bennett Field,
yeah. So at Floyd Bennett Field, is somebody going to say, gee, we just didn't know where we're going to get clean mattresses or buy toilet paper? I mean, and then the city says, well, it's not our problem. And then you have people who you're trying to do your best for living in that sort of condition, or it's telling them, go get a job, buy yourself some toilet paper. I mean, I'm just not following the logic behind it. I'm trying.
I know.
Your reporting is great, but I'm like trying to figure it out. If we're going to do it, for goodness gracious, sheets and pillows.
So it's interesting you mentioned
buy a box of them,
Yeah. Well, Floyd Bennett Field, that is actually, if that opens, it wouldn't actually be run by the Department of Homeless Services. So a lot of the standards that we talk about, especially when it comes to spacing between beds, storage lockers for people's possessions, all those are expectations for people who are in Department of Homeless Services shelters. The interesting thing that I didn't know before I started reporting a lot on homelessness in New York is the Department of Homeless Services is just one part of our overall shelter system these days. So the waivers that the city was seeking were for when they have to set up additional space within that system. Already, there are a number of migrants staying in shelters run by other agencies where you have cots that are head to toe, these kinds of standards that are already somewhat reduced from what the Department of Homeless Services must maintain. So,
Well, excuse me, that's very interesting, and I
yeah,
really appreciate your mentioning that. So, yes, there are other agencies that are working with migrants, and so some of these rules don't apply to them. Although I would wonder, just from knowing some of the people who run these things, if they would even consider not doing that sort of thing for the
right.
people, unless it's a church that just doesn't have the facility. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying.
There's a lot of complexity here, and I think to give the city to give an acknowledgement of how they responded to the story, what they're talking about. They say, we have our hands full. We're trying to accommodate as quickly as we can. In the spirit of avoiding having people sleeping on the street, we need like a little bit less regulation for when we're setting up areas or adding extra beds to areas. Now, obviously, the concerns that advocates raise about this are entirely legitimate, very concerning. It's probably not a bureaucrat who's somewhere saying, we're just not going to give toilet paper to this place, like go into it with that approach. But it definitely seems to be seeking some regulatory relaxation, which they seem to be saying is, look, we need to act quickly. We can't cross all our T's and dot all of our I's in the same way as we would under normal circumstances. Obviously, the response to that is these standards exist for a reason. They are fundamental
Well,
to
yes, that's the thing. And listen, it costs whatever it's going to cost at Floyd Bennett Field, or originally at Orchard Beach, or wherever they were talking about putting a big tent. That whole process is going to cost a lot. Seems to me, if you're going to do it again, this is Gary, then you spend a little extra and you get toilet paper and pillows and sheets, and at least try to make it decent, because they're here and you want them to do better. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
in other words, we want them to be able to, but if you hold them back with those kinds of issues, wow, their process, and of course all of our process is more difficult.
Yeah. So my goal at City Limits is to keep a really close eye on how this plays out in practice. One
Yes.
interesting thing is the state has required, if the city goes and picks a specific area and they want to relax some standards, they're going to have to, within 2 days, contact the state, say, this is the location, these are the waivers that we have issued. And then the state would then have recourse to, I think, shorten the waiver period, et cetera.
Right.
So we're definitely going to be watching closely on how this plays.
We interviewed Congressman Richie Torres on on the other program that I host called Bronx Talk, and I asked him about this and what does the federal, because we've been talking about the city and the state, what the federal government, and his contention was the federal government has got to push forward and get work permits for these people as soon as possible, so that even if they are in a place which doesn't have sheets and pillowcases and toilet paper, they have a chance to find a job or get work. But if they can't do that, then you know what I mean? That's the part the Fed needs to play, and that's a congressional thing. Although he mentioned that he thought the president could do that by presidential order. That's out of my realm, but that's the kind of thing that would move them forward.
Yeah, and I think our mayor and our governor are very much in agreement on that point, saying that's one thing that the federal government.
And in fact, Congressman Torres was very clear to say, and credit him for being open about it, saying that the federal government at the moment has failed in this process. Let's just move to another issue, which is related, and you wrote about it. The city seeks state approval to issue 60-day shelter limit to asylum seekers. So that means if they don't have another place to go in 2 months, we're then putting them on the streets, and then all of a sudden they're moving into a homeless shelter. I mean, again, I'm trying to work with you here. I'm working on it.
No, it's a lot of confusing things to keep straight. So earlier this summer, Mayor Adams made an announcement, and his contention has been the system as a whole is overwhelmed. And in the midst of this, he has sought to prioritize longer shelter stays for families with children. So the policy he put into effect is starting with single adults who have immigrated to New York over the last year and a half are in this category. Once you have, you could receive a notice and say 60 days from now, our goal, you will lose your shelter placement. And if at that point you don't have an alternative place to live, then you're going to have to go back and reapply for a placement. So that was an immediate red flag for advocates. What the city has said is the goal is to help people along their way. There is some, you had mentioned 100,000 immigrants have come in the last
year. I use the word migrants. I mean, immigrants would be a different category, no?
Well, I think advocates feel differently about different terms, but okay. I guess, yeah. So, but yeah.
You're the housing expert, so I'll concede to you.
But so the idea was people just might need a couple, there are concrete ways that we can be helping people move on to the next place. Maybe we haven't been meeting with them as much as we could to help them on their way. So the way the city is justifying this is saying we are going to accompany these 60-day limits with intensified casework to help people find something new. So this policy has been ongoing.
Excuse me, that is to say that we're going to add something on the front end to make sure that they're better off after 60 days. That I like, but to just say, well, you're not. I mean, that becomes a difficult thing.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to the other story. There's a lot of everything is going to require a lot of close looks and keeping up with what these things mean in practice. I think plenty of members of the city council would say, yes, they agree more intensified casework is helpful, but some of them haven't seen like a lot to make them confident that just because this new policy is in effect, everyone's going to get the help they need to get housed somewhere stable.
That's rather optimistic, to say the least. Listen, we're about out of time. We could keep talking. I know that there was another issue about the shelter intake process. We'll save that for the next time you're with us. Emma Whitford, who's the senior housing reporter for City Limits. What would we do without you? I don't know, because having these dialogues and at least understanding what's going on is so important, because these are real human beings involved, and that's
absolutely important. Yes.
You're great. Say hello to Jean Marie and all our friends there. Thank you.
I will.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, yes, music, Bronx music, jazz. Stick around.